It's time for our talkSPORT Explainer. This is the part of the show where our panellists try and look behind the numbers and make sense of a story within the world of football. Today, it's manager salaries and figures. They've been released by talkSPORT and some of them are pretty surprising. They reveal the highest and lowest paid bosses in Premier League football. We have some of them in front of us here. Matt, I want to start with you because as we look at some of these names, you've, of course, got Pep Guardiola right at the top on 20 million, then Mikel Arteta on 15 million. Perhaps those two not as surprising as the other ones. But given the position of some of the clubs, which ones would you pick out as quite interesting?
The top few weren't a surprise. I did see that Iriola was at the bottom, and he's on a very low rate. Is he on $1 million?
He's on $1 million.
Now, I think he's interesting. Yeah, so I think it's interesting for a few things. I suspect his salary is heavily incentivized, which I think all clubs should do. You should pretty much incentivize most of that, to be honest. So I'd have maybe half of your total remuneration in terms of base, and then I just put loads of bonuses in there. But I think the thing about Iriola was he was a very surprising, sort of slightly out of left field choice. I know the ownership group a little bit. They're very smart. Bill Foley. He's another one of these US investors, a bit like the Freaking Group. Made a lot of money, I think, in the insurance business. Then got into wine. He got into more fun things like wine and travel and sport. And the first thing he did was basically start, a bit like Spencer, a new franchise, an ice hockey franchise in Las Vegas. You know, what a place to put an ice hockey team. Well, he made it work. And they became the first, I think they did it the quickest, a new franchise to win their sports competition. So he knows what he's doing. And his whole thing to make, the difference, the USP is fun, right? Vegas. So they've made the game the event. They have this ludicrous kind of knights pageant before the game where they slay the other team's mascot. It's wild. You can see it on YouTube. Do it. Now, he is very data-led, very, very data-led. And he identified, or his people, his team identified Iriola. And they ended up getting rid of Gary O'Neill, which was an unusual decision. Gary O'Neill was a perfectly good coach, but it was, we think we can do better here. And I thought Iriola was fantastic last season. So he was the one that jumped out. And I just keep hearing within the industry, one, everyone thinks he's a great coach. Two, they think that Bournemouth are massively outperforming their budget, and they're doing a really good job in recruitment. A little bit like Brighton, who are just down the road. So I think that was the one that jumped out to me, that he was right at the bottom. It seemed like a really low base salary, certainly compared to his peers. But I think he was a brave call, brave decision, and he's doing a good job.
You mentioned Brighton, I think, there as well. We should just point out Fabian Hürzeler, Steve Cooper and Russell Martin. Their salaries are unavailable to the public or unreported at the moment. So we do have the rest of them here. Spencer, which ones for you stick out? I mean, it's got to be Sean Dyche there in sixth. After Guardiola, Arteta, Emery, Ten Hag, Slot, you get Sean Dyche with his club currently in the relegation zone as well. Why do you think it was that he was offered so much money? Does it feel almost like a bit of a desperation tactic? Because, obviously at the time when Dyche was coming in, Everton needed to try and stay in the division.
Yeah, well, that'll be certainly a massive part of it. It links very nicely to our previous discussion about one of the things that I'm sure the new owners will be looking at and thinking, well, hang on, why are we spending so much money on a manager when we're not at that level in the league, It's probably a great agent. Sean's got, I was going to say, Iriola probably needs to change his agent because it's actually laughable, the difference in their salaries, to be honest. He's a very specific man, right, Sean Dyche? He comes in to save the day in that instance, right? So you're prepared to spend a little bit more money if you're in a panic station mode than you are if you're creating a new strategy. So when Bournemouth did make the change, I myself was very outspoken. I thought that it was terrible what they did to Gary O'Neill because he was doing such a good job. But they clearly had a strategy in place, and you can't argue with it in hindsight. And the fact that they have that strategy is probably what allowed them to be very stern with their negotiations. So, no, this is the package that we're going to give you because we know what we're doing over here. Maybe that wasn't the case when they negotiated the deal with Sean Dyche. But, I mean, there's a few in there. I think Eddie Howe, if you look at some of the money that's being spent, the fact that he's obviously been tipped massively to the potential to be the England manager in the future, he'll be probably looking at that and seeing if there's room for him to increase his deal. Obviously, Enzo Maresca, whilst Chelsea, it's surprising to see them quite low on an expenditure chart for a change. I would say that he's a relatively unproven manager at the top flight, isn't he? He's done with Leicester, but it made sense that he's not coming in on the sort of, even the Unai Emery money. What I like about the Emery one is, he's on very good money, right? He's on the third in the league in terms of contract, if you like. But he deserves it. He's getting it done. You can't argue with it. If anyone deserves these figures, they're relative, of course, then he does. He's doing a fantastic job. There's a few there probably, not getting great value for their teams.
Indeed. Just on Maresca there, Matt, on 4.2 million, Spencer made the point. It is interesting to see that Chelsea haven't splurged on his salary, it seems. But, as we mentioned, an unproven entity when he was coming into the Premier League as well. But just on a wider point of Chelsea and the current ownership and the way they're being run at the moment, are we starting to see a bit of a shift in terms of the opinion on how it's gone? Because, of course, before that, everyone was maybe looking at the transfer policy and thinking, wow, what is going on here? These are disruptors of football. It's not quite working out. But given these early signs of the season, are we starting to see a tilt towards these plans potentially working in the long term?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you could argue they were doing that at the end of last season, right? I think they finished with 6 straight wins, didn't they? And they got European football. So, look, we have, I'm always careful about not enough data, right? You hear that all the time, certainly in maths and data circles. So let's not overreact to sort of relatively short-term events. I think the picture, if you like, the investment thesis of Clear Lake and Todd Boehly is not proven yet. They have spent an absolute fortune, and what struck me was they went in and were spending big on guys like Raheem Sterling, and then a complete handbrake turn at the next transfer window when they went young, right? Fine, but it was a massive handbrake turn. And they had this one clever strategy of the long-term contracts, the amortization, which incidentally is what Boehly did in Major League Baseball. He started handing out really long contracts. Slightly different idea there. It wasn't about financial fair play. It was about what they call player control. They wanted control of the players. So I thought it was interesting how he sort of replicated that idea in English football. I think we've all seen it, right? Chelsea fans have seen it. Again, I used the word before, it's incoherent. They have too many players, too many of the same types of players, and it clearly wasn't working. Is it starting to work? Yeah, I think it's starting to work because they bought good players and they couldn't be that bad that long. And some of those players, the Cole Palmers, ended up being good buys. So, yes, let's give them a chance. I think the Maresca salary is interesting because one of the things that they have talked about, certainly, when they're briefing people like me that there is a plan, is that they have heavily incentivized pay for players and wages. And I think the Maresca salary is a good example of that. I think just picking out some other ones there, I noticed that Arne Slot's on a relatively low wage in terms of where he would be in the table. I also think what's interesting there is it's considerably less than Jurgen Klopp was being paid. I think he was being paid twice as much. So, younger manager, unproven manager having to come in and maybe on your second contract, third contract, you start to really reap the rewards. And just another thing that I think was really interesting for me when I looked at the whole table was English football managers are well paid. I was looking at what, their counterparts in US sport are being paid. And bear in mind that NFL teams earn about twice as much money. They're much more sustainable businesses. Premier League managers pay about the same. In fact, Pep Guardiola earns more than the top-paid NFL coach. He earns more than the top-paid NBA coach. So I think that's relatively interesting. And I know their careers are short, but they are well paid while they have them.
And Spencer, just on the top two as well, because obviously they're two managers who are doing very well at the moment in Pep Guardiola and Mikel Arteta. But that is quite a jump, isn't it? From Unai Emery on 8 million up to Arteta on 15 million. And then, of course, Guardiola beyond that. And as Matt says, they're some of the highest paid within sport as well. Does it interest you at all that is quite a leap, especially to Arteta? Because Guardiola has had so much success, but Arteta still... Despite the fact Arsenal are doing very well, we're still waiting to see the reach of that success.
Yeah, I think the Pep one is a unicorn, isn't he? You can't really make any sort of logical argument about whether he should be paid less than that because he's just potentially the best manager of all time, right? So you can't really put him in the same box. The Arteta one is very interesting because your eye immediately looks at this and you see him in second place and you think, oh, that's about right because they're the second best team probably at the moment, maybe the best team this year. But he hasn't won the league. For someone, even he hasn't won a lot. Full stop. Some FA Cup, whatever. But Unai Emery is a serial winner, of European competition. He's on half what Arteta's on. Is he doing a worse job than Arteta? I don't think so. I think Emery's doing an outstanding job. One of the things that I love about Unai Emery is, and obviously he's been there a little bit longer now, but that first season when he came in, he did it with other people's players. He didn't come in and buy a load of other players. He inherited the same squad that Steven Gerrard had used, and he made them a lot better. That is coaching. That is what proper management is. So again, this is no slight on Mikel Arteta whatsoever, because I think he's fantastic.
Do you feel though that, because you mentioned there, he hasn't won the title yet, do you feel at the moment he's potentially being overpaid there?
Well, I think that money is probably more of an indicator of the fact that he has interest in him. So, there's a lot of people talking about whether he could be a replacement for Pep at Man City, if Pep was to move on, if Man City were to have, some sort of punishment coming and it change things up a little bit. I know there's been links with him at Barcelona as well. So as to when he went on to that wage, it would be interesting to know, was there a negotiation that was done that said, look, we're going to up your money considerably. We want you to stay. We want you to buy into the project. Because it would be quite hard to be, well, not only disloyal to a club that are paying you that sort of money, but harder for another team to afford you, quite frankly. So I think there's a bit of protectionism there in them wanting to keep Arteta. Whether he warrants that based on what he's done in his career so far, I'd probably say he doesn't. But that doesn't mean he couldn't become a £15 million manager.
Gents, to finish off, I'm going to ask you both. I'll start with you, Matt. Who is the most overpaid manager on this list, and who is the most underpaid, would you say?
Well, I've already mentioned, I think Iriola's, that's a fantastic deal for Bournemouth. Who's the most overpaid? Is it rude of me to pick on Erik ten Hag? Maybe. Sean Dyche. Sean Dyche, if you were going on a sort of, pounds per points basis, he's got a lot of work to do. I think Thomas Frank is that's interesting that he's eighth, but then, he's doing a great job there. So I'm going to go overpaid would have to be Dyche, I suppose, and underpaid Iriola.
How about you, Spencer?
The Frank one is interesting because obviously Brentford are very astute with how they spend their money.
He?
But he's done a fantastic job, you can't argue with it. I think Iriola clearly is the most underpaid there. He needs to get a new agent ASAP. Not that I like dealing with agents, by the way, no. Actually, not enjoyable. But I'll go Ten Hag. Listen, I just personally think he's been given a really good treatment there. I know he's had some tough times and he's had to deal with some disciplinary issues and stuff, but for Man United, it's one of them where they could probably afford to spend the Pep money and the Mikel money, whatever, if they were getting a manager that was doing that. But for that money, should he be doing a bit more? I think probably yes.
Almost 7 million is there, yeah. Oh, there we go. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. That's it from us this week. If you want to get involved, post your comments below and our expert panel will answer them as best they can. Thank you very much for your company, and thanks once again to our panellists, Spencer Owen and Matt Slater as well. See you next time.